and social media connectivity. And then the last thing, he mentioned artificial intelligence. So you see that daddies and mommies in the house also know what is going on. So it's not only artificial intelligence is not limited to the use of the Gen Zs and the millennials. So we have our daddies and mommies also using artificial intelligence. And that is why we see some of our mommies asking, AI and all of them some questions. So while I'd like to quickly recognize the presence of some of our guests who are also on the I table. We have Barrister Ajimobi this morning, the Faculty of Multidisciplinary Officer. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us. We also have Mr. Ajimobi, representing the late Professor Ajimobi. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, sir. We appreciate you. We also have Mrs. Joy Oyashote, representing Professor F.A. Kameno. Thank you very much, ma'am, for joining us. As we get, as more guests arrive, we'll announce to the house. Also, a quick announcement. If you check our WhatsApp platform, a live streaming link has been dropped, so you can share with friends and colleagues who are not able to join us this morning. Please, 5 seconds, check your WhatsApp, share with friends, post on your status, tell them that something big is happening this morning at the University of Ibadan. And I hope you know that all over the world, adopting people into Sistn. So it's it's just only this one. I hope you agree with me. So it is only this event that is adopting people. No other event. You go to Australia, you go to Canada, they are all connected to this event. So please a round of applause for us once again. Very quickly, as Heather introduced, we'd like to have a distinguished guest lecturer for this induction ceremony in person of Dr. Tunde Adibola to deliver his lecture. Please a round of applause.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is with great joy that I responded to the invitation to give this keynote address. A great joy because I was privileged to be part of the team that started ARCIS around 1990. When I came fresh from the University of Wales with my master's degree. And I was fortunate to have been introduced to artificial intelligence. And I came back to Nigeria with great excitement to do something in artificial intelligence. And when I got to Nigeria, I learned that there was a new center in the University of Ibadan for information science. And I presented a proposal for a training in artificial intelligence for the finance industry. And the distinguished Professor Olapode Aipeku, ably here represented, of blessed memory, accepted the proposal, and the workshop held for a week. And after the workshop, I was conscripted into the team of ARCIS, and the rest is history. It is with this background that I happily and enthusiastically accepted to give the keynote at this function. I wish to thank the organizers of the function. I wish to thank them particularly for making the necessary efforts to build a society for information professionals. We live in a world that is more and more driven by information, and it will be a travesty if a country like Nigeria does not have a society that can take care of the professional development of people in such an industry. I will be speaking this morning on the topic of engaging development information. Engaging development information. And I chose this topic because I believe one area in which the discipline of information science and the technology that follows the science can be useful to Nigeria is in mainstreaming development as a phenomenon that we need to take very seriously. We are glibly described as a developing country. Sorry to say that the pace of development is rather slow, and some of the countries that are sometimes referred to as advanced countries are actually the developing countries. They are the ones developing. So if we are to justify the description of being a developing country, we then may need to mainstream development, particularly in our education. I hesitate to try to define development in such an way because it is a rather fluid terminology. But I will at least describe it as a complex, multifaceted, positive change phenomenon that is characterized by social, environmental, political, economic, and many other objectives. It's a broad process of sustainable improvement in a people's quality of life. It concerns their social, economic, educational, health circumstances, establishing equal opportunities and justice. The attainment of these goals within the development paradigm must be done in such a way that it does not compromise the ability of the future generation to achieve same and more. And development is characterized by the application of natural principles and technology to improve the conditions of both the biotic and the abiotic components of a given local as well as the global ecology. That is what development is. What about information? I came into information science from a technology background, and my appreciation of information reflects this background. So I define information as patterns in either mass or energy that reflect elements of reality. It is usually, such patterns are usually revealed by the intelligent manipulation of raw facts and figures produced by natural or artificial processes as basic data. Essentially, Information is an abstract representation of reality which is employed vitally in support of the perennial need to make decisions and take actions. That is what information is from my point of view. To give an illustration, if you cut a tree and you look at the tree stumps, you will see a set of rings. The particles of wood could have been arranged randomly, which in information science we will refer to as equiprobably. But when you look at the stump, you do not perceive equiprobability. You see a definite pattern. If anything in nature does not manifest randomly, something caused it not to be random. And when you look at these grains of wood, the way they are arranged, people in forestry tell us that these rings carry information on the age of the tree. Because every period of wet and dry season affect the rate of growth of the tree to the extent that there are periods of time in the year when the grains of wood are densely packed and another time when they are sparsely packed. To the extent that not only can we count these rings to determine how many periods of wet and dry season the tree has gone through, we can actually also measure the width of each ring to determine how long or how short a particular dry or wet season was, how long a particular dry or wet season was in a particular year. So not only are we able to tell the age of the tree, we are also able to infer history. That is what we refer to as information, as patterns in mass or energy that reflects reality. But I choose this morning to talk specifically about development information, which I choose to define as observed and or derived patterns that inform decision making, empower communities, raise awareness, and facilitate participation in the process that improve a people's quality of life. We talk here about data, knowledge, and the general communication that supports as well as promotes social, economic, political, environmental, and cultural development. It is in this context that I speak this morning about engaging development information. We talk about information as representing reality. Information as an abstract representation of reality is employed vitally in support of the perennial need to make decisions and take actions. We do not appreciate how much decisions we make and actions we take because almost every instant of our lives we are making decisions and taking actions. The fact that you are here today is a result of you making decisions and taking actions based on information. And that is why we talk of informed decision. Because any decision that is not informed is bound to lead into some kind of unpredictable results. Information for most of history was based largely on analogy. We use energy in one form as an analog of energy in another form. We use mass arrangement in some form as an analogy to the same in another form. In fact, in the Yoruba culture, the role of analogy in using reality, using information to represent reality, is most succinctly expressed in such words as Alo, Itan, and Owe. Alo is a noun derived from the verb law, which is to twine, to convolve, to ply, to make one thing resemble the other. And that is why children are taught through Alo by telling stories of human behavior through the instrumentality of animals and other inanimate objects. Also is Itan, another noun derived from the verb ton, which means first and foremost to radiate, to spread out, to shine, to reflect. All these are words that express analogies, one thing representing the other. And finally, lots more, but for today, Owe, which is actually Owe, that with which it can be wrapped, compared, or explained. So we see here that the whole of human history, until recently, represented information in the form of analogies. And that's why we talk a lot about analogs. But there was a recent shift in the last 50 or so years from the analog, from using analogy to using digital approach. And this digital shift has had a major effect on the way we now perceive information. If I show you a pair of brand new pair of shoes, and I show you a pair of a used version of that pair of shoes, you are likely to put more value on the brand new pair of shoes than the used one. The reason why you do so is because you have established a relationship between the state of the shoe and the value of the shoe. You have created an analogy between the state of the shoe and its value. If, however, I offer you a crisp, neat 10 naira note and offer you a scruffy, torn, sellotape held together 1,000 naira note, you surely will prefer the 1,000 naira note. Because here now, the value of the currency I'm offering you is not analogous to the state. The value is dependent on the digit written on it. And that is the distinction between information as an analog or information as digital. Unlike many people sound, analog information is not old and digital new. They are two valid paradigms of representing information. The only problem is if I now tell you that that crusty pair of boots, rough and untidy, was Nelson Mandela's boots on Robben Island. all of a sudden it assumes a totally new value. That is the dynamism in information. It is always within context. So when we now talk about information, digital information and the analog, we find that there are specific characteristics of information in the analog domain and in the digital domain. These are issues for classrooms, which I will not bore you with here. But needless to say that once we found a way of representing information in the digital domain, very many advantages attended that development. Some of these advantages include the fact that you could control the degradation of the information. In analog information, the further the information goes, the container in which the information rides, as the container weakens, even the information inside it weakens. But in the digital domain, no matter how weak the container is, the information therein still remains. Another very important characteristic of digital information is it makes for convergence in any form in which you use the information. It is stored in the same way. That is why, well, in these days it's difficult to talk about specific devices. There was a time you could actually buy a camera and it would be just a camera. There is a time you could buy a watch and it would be just a watch. There was a time you could buy a record player and it would be just playing music. But today, of course, you know what you call the phone and you put in your pocket will do all that. So, at the twilight of moving from these specific tools to general purpose tools, you could store an assignment, a typed out assignment. You could store it on a camera. The camera may not be able to read it, but you can store it on the camera. And if you connect the camera to a device that can read it, it will turn it into words and spaces for you. That is the essence of convergence. And the implication is that because of the economy of scale that convergence pushed, then many things that were beyond the reach of people who are not specialists became general purpose and therefore affordable. These are some of the attributes of digital information that make it very, very much accessible and efficient. I would like to present a scenario in nature which I choose to describe as a situation of ramps and steps. What do I mean by ramps and steps? Unfortunately, I look around and I don't find a ramp. But when you find a building that you can use, that a disabled person on a wheelchair can use to be elevated and come back down, that is a ramp. The counterpart of a ramp is steps. Human development has featured both the phenomenon of ramps and the phenomenon of steps. Phenomenon of ramps in the sense that you have so little